Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's B2 Level podcast. In this episode, we start a long, reflective, and continuous story about personal growth, discovery, and the challenges of adapting to a new city. This story is designed to be engaging, thought-provoking, and long enough to feel like a real journey. I arrived in the city early in the morning, before the streets were busy and before the sun fully rose. The air was cool, and the soft light gave the buildings a golden hue. I had never seen so many tall buildings, so many people moving quickly, and so many signs and advertisements all at once. The city was vibrant, alive, and slightly overwhelming. My first steps were careful. I wanted to understand my surroundings without feeling lost. I walked slowly down the main street, observing people, listening to conversations, and noticing the small details, the smell of fresh bread from a bakery, the sound of a tram approaching, and the laughter of children on their way to school. Each moment felt significant, and I realized that the city had its own rhythm, its own flow, and its own lessons to teach. I decided to visit a small cafe I had read about in a guidebook. It was tucked away on a narrow side street, almost hidden from the busy main roads. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, filled with the smell of coffee, pastries, and soft music playing in the background. I sat near the window, taking notes in my notebook. Observing the interactions between the barista and customers, I realized that even simple exchanges carried lessons about communication, patience, and empathy. As the day progressed, I wandered into a local park. The park was quiet compared to the streets outside. Elderly people walked slowly, children played under the supervision of parents, and joggers ran along winding paths. I sat on a bench, observing the dynamics of life here. I noticed how people navigated space, how they smiled, and how they interacted without words. Each observation seemed small, yet it revealed a deeper understanding of urban life. By afternoon, I entered a small art gallery. Paintings, photographs, and sculptures filled the rooms. I spent hours walking among the pieces, reflecting on the emotions and stories they conveyed. I wrote in my notebook, "Art is a mirror of life." It teaches patience, interpretation, and reflection. Observing carefully allows us to see perspectives we might otherwise miss. Later, I explored a street market. The market was chaotic, full of energy, sounds, and smells. Vendors called out prices, children ran between stalls, and shoppers negotiated for the best deals. I bought some fresh fruit and tried talking to the vendors in the local language, practicing politeness, patience, and small talk. Each interaction built my confidence and understanding of human connection. As evening approached, I walked to a quiet bridge over the river. The water reflected the sunset, turning it into shades of gold, orange, and pink. I took out my notebook again, writing reflections about the day. Today I observed, learned, and practiced patience. The city is alive with lessons at every corner. Understanding people, spaces, and interactions is a gradual process, but each step counts. Growth comes from continuous observation, reflection, and effort. By night, I returned to my apartment, tired but satisfied. I reflected on the journey so far and realized that living in a new city is both challenging and enlightening. The experience teaches independence, adaptability, and mindfulness. I ended my day with a final note in my notebook. Tomorrow, I will explore deeper, meet new people, and continue learning. Each day is a step forward in understanding the city and myself. The next morning, I woke up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Yesterday had been full of observations and lessons, but today I wanted to engage more actively with the city, its people, and its hidden corners. I made a cup of tea, opened my notebook, and wrote a short plan. Step out early. Observe, interact, reflect. Find moments to learn something new. As I stepped outside, the streets were slowly coming alive. The early morning calm was now mixed with the sounds of delivery trucks, school buses, and pedestrians heading to work. I decided to walk to a district I had only briefly passed by before. Narrow streets, small shops, and cafes filled the area, each one offering its own unique charm. I noticed a small bookstore tucked between a coffee shop and a flower store. The sign above read, "Stories from Around the World." I stepped inside. The smell of old paper, ink, and polished wood filled my senses. I wandered through the aisles slowly, touching the spines of books, reading titles, and discovering unfamiliar authors. I found a book about urban gardens and decided to buy it. I realized that even small discoveries, like a single book, could open entirely new worlds of thought and reflection. Leaving the bookstore, I continued walking and came across a group of artists setting up an outdoor exhibition. Paintings were propped on easels, sculptures displayed on small tables, and photographs hung along the fences. I watched them work, adjusting canvases, discussing colors, sharing ideas. I approached one of the artists and asked a few questions about their techniques and inspiration. To my surprise, they welcomed me warmly, explaining their creative process and encouraging me to try sketching myself. I took out my notebook and attempted my first sketches. They were rough, imperfect, but the act of observing and translating reality onto paper was immensely satisfying. I wrote, "Creativity is about expression, not perfection. Each attempt teaches more than success alone. Observation, patience, and experimentation are key." By mid-afternoon, I found myself in a quiet park near a river. Children were playing, dogs running alongside, and elderly couples walked slowly, holding hands. I sat on a bench and simply observed. I noticed the subtle interactions: a child helping another child up after a fall, a man giving directions to a lost tourist, a woman picking up litter from the path. Small acts of kindness and attention reminded me that even in a busy city, human connection and empathy were everywhere. I spent hours reflecting, writing, and planning. Each detail of the day became a lesson in awareness, patience, and engagement. The city no longer felt overwhelming. It felt alive with possibilities, stories, and lessons. As evening approached, I wandered to a quiet bridge overlooking the river. The sun was setting, painting the water in gold, orange, and pink hues. I watched the reflections carefully, feeling the calm wash over me. I opened my notebook and wrote a long reflection. Today, I realized that growth is a gradual process. It is built on observation, engagement, reflection, and action. Every person I meet, every street I walk, every book I read teaches me something. The city is a teacher, and I am a student learning to navigate, adapt, and grow. Patience, curiosity, and courage are my companions. I returned to my apartment as night fell, feeling both exhausted and inspired. I knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people, and new lessons. The city had already begun to feel like home, not because it was easy, but because I had learned to observe, reflect, and participate. Before sleeping, I wrote a final note for the day. Life is a continuous journey of learning. Each day is an opportunity to discover, reflect, and grow. The challenges I face are not obstacles, but lessons in patience, courage, and resilience. Tomorrow, I continue this journey, ready for whatever the city and life will teach me next. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling of quiet determination. The city was slowly waking up outside my window. The faint hum of traffic, the distant chatter of people, and the soft chirping of birds mixing with the urban sounds. I brewed my morning tea, sat by the window, and watched as the streets gradually filled with life. I reflected on the previous days, the lessons I had learned, the people I had met, and the small successes that gave me courage. I decided to visit a part of the city I had never explored, a district famous for its small workshops and traditional crafts. The streets were narrow, lined with old brick buildings and colorful shop signs. I noticed a sign above one shop that read, "Handmade Instruments, Lessons and Repairs." Curiosity pulled me in. Inside, the smell of polished wood, metal strings, and varnish filled the air. An elderly man looked up from a workbench. His hands were skilled and steady as he adjusted the strings of a guitar. "Can I help you?" he asked with a gentle smile. I'm curious about your work," I replied. "I've never seen instruments being made before." He motioned for me to come closer. He showed me how each piece of wood was carefully selected, how the shaping and sanding required patience, and how the sound depended not only on skill, but on attention to detail and care. I realized that this meticulous work was a perfect metaphor for life. Small, thoughtful actions, practiced repeatedly, created beauty and mastery over time. After spending hours observing and asking questions, I left the workshop with a small notebook full of observations. I thought, patience and attention to detail are skills as important as courage and motivation. Every craft, every process mirrors life itself. I continued my walk, turning onto a quiet street with a community center. I had read that they offered free language exchange sessions for people new to the city. I entered and was greeted warmly by a group of volunteers and participants. People were chatting in pairs, practicing English, Spanish, and several other languages. I joined a small group, introduced myself, and started a conversation. The experience was more challenging than I expected. I struggled to find the right words, to understand accents, and to keep up with rapid speech. At first, I felt frustrated, even embarrassed. But then I remembered something important. Learning, like growth, is not about perfection. It is about effort, persistence, and patience. After an hour, I noticed improvement, not dramatic, but subtle. I could respond more easily, understand questions more quickly, and even share small jokes. The group encouraged me, and the warmth of shared learning reminded me that human connection was a vital part of personal growth. As the afternoon turned into evening, I decided to walk along the river once more. The city lights reflected on the water, and the cool breeze carried scents of food from nearby cafes. I paused on a small bridge, watching the reflections and writing in my notebook. Today, I learned that courage alone is not enough. Observation, patience, and persistence matter just as much. Engaging with people, even when it is uncomfortable, teaches humility, empathy, and adaptability. Small steps, repeated daily, lead to transformation. By nightfall, I returned to my apartment, tired but fulfilled. I realized that each day in this city was a layered lesson. From the craftsman's workshop to the language exchange, from quiet observation to active participation, each experience contributed to my understanding of myself and the world around me. Before sleeping, I wrote a final note. Transformation is a continuous process. It is not immediate, dramatic, or always visible. It grows slowly, quietly, and persistently through observation, engagement, reflection, and courage. Tomorrow, I will step into new streets, meet new people, and learn new lessons. This journey has no end, only continuous growth. The next morning, I woke up to a gray sky, soft rain pattering against my window. It was different from the sunny mornings I had experienced before, and I realized that the city's mood could shift just like the weather. Today, I wanted to explore the quieter, less visible parts of the city, the hidden streets, the small libraries, and the neighborhoods that tourists rarely visited. I dressed in a raincoat and sturdy shoes and stepped outside. The streets glistened with wet reflections, and the air smelled fresh, slightly earthy and cool. People hurried past me with umbrellas, their footsteps quick, splashing water on the puddles. I noticed the rhythm of the city in the rain, slower than usual, yet somehow more intimate, more reflective. My first stop was a small, old library tucked between two apartment buildings. The entrance was modest, with a wooden door and a small sign that read, "Public Library, Knowledge for All." I pushed the door open and was greeted by the smell of books, paper, and ink. Inside, the library was quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. I wandered between the shelves, touching the spines of books, reading titles, and occasionally pulling out a book to skim a few pages. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair, noticed my interest. She smiled and whispered, "Take your time. Explore as much as you like." Hours passed like minutes as I read stories about history, science, and cultures from around the world. I realized how small knowledge could be, yet how vast its impact was on perspective and understanding. Each story was a mirror, reflecting ideas, emotions, and experiences I had never imagined. I took careful notes in my notebook, jotting down reflections and thoughts for future exploration. After leaving the library, I wandered into a nearby residential neighborhood. The streets were narrow and lined with small houses, each with flowers, small gardens, and personal touches that revealed the owners' personalities. Children played in the streets, dogs barked, and neighbors greeted each other warmly. I walked slowly, noticing details that most people ignored: the texture of a wall, the sound of water dripping from a rooftop, the patterns of light and shadow on the pavement. In the afternoon, I found a small cafe that seemed to invite reflection. The walls were covered with art, books were stacked on shelves, and the music was soft, almost meditative. I ordered a cup of tea and sat near the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. I opened my notebook and wrote about the day. Today, I discovered that the quiet, overlooked places in the city hold as much wisdom as the busy streets. Observation, patience, and mindfulness allow us to see layers of life that are often invisible. Empathy grows when we notice details, listen carefully, and allow ourselves to slow down. As evening approached, the rain stopped, leaving behind a city washed clean, glimmering in the soft twilight. I walked to a small bridge over the river and watched as the water reflected the dim lights of the surrounding buildings. A family of ducks swam close to the bank, and a few people lingered, enjoying the peaceful moment. I felt a sense of calm and connection, as though the city had shared a secret with me. I spent a long time on that bridge, reflecting on the transformation I had already begun. Each experience, no matter how small, had added to my understanding of life, people, and myself. I realized that growth is not linear. It ebbs and flows like the river beneath me, sometimes quiet, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. Before returning to my apartment, I wrote one final note for the day. Transformation is not only about action, but also about reflection. Each day, each street, each interaction offers lessons if we are willing to notice. Patience, curiosity, and mindfulness are the keys to understanding. Tomorrow, I will continue my exploration, ready to discover the hidden wisdom in the city, in its people, and within myself. The morning arrived quietly, with the faint sound of city life gradually growing louder outside my window. Today, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of wandering randomly, I would focus on connecting with people who had unique stories, whose experiences might teach me something I could never learn from books or streets alone. I started my day at a small community center, tucked away behind a series of narrow alleys. Inside, people from different countries, ages, and backgrounds gathered for workshops, classes, and discussions. I joined a group participating in a storytelling session. Each person had a moment to share a story, sometimes humorous, sometimes sad, sometimes inspiring. One woman, an elderly immigrant from a distant country, spoke about her journey to the city. She described leaving her home, facing challenges she had never imagined, and slowly building a life filled with small joys and personal victories. Her story was detailed and rich with emotion. I listened intently, taking notes and reflecting on the courage and resilience it must have taken to endure such a journey. Next, a young man shared a story about failure and recovery. He had started a small business, invested time and money, and failed within months. But instead of giving up, he had learned, adapted, and eventually started something even better. I was struck by how failure could become a teacher, how perseverance and reflection could turn mistakes into meaningful growth. After the session, I spent hours speaking with participants individually, asking questions, sharing experiences, and listening carefully. Each conversation added layers of understanding, cultural differences, personal struggles, small victories, and the subtle ways people navigate life's unpredictability. I realized that personal growth is not only about self-reflection, but also about empathy, listening, and understanding others' perspectives. By afternoon, I left the community center and wandered to a nearby park. The city seemed calmer now, as if the lessons of the day had slowed its pace for me. I found a quiet spot under a tree, opened my notebook, and reflected. Listening to others is as important as observing the environment. Stories carry wisdom, resilience, and perspectives we cannot experience ourselves. The courage to share, the patience to listen, and the willingness to learn from others are essential parts of growth. As the sun began to set, I walked along the river again. The reflections of the city lights danced on the water, mingling with the colors of the sky. Joggers passed by, a street musician played soft melodies nearby, and families walked together in quiet conversation. The rhythm of the city, the flow of people, and the subtle patterns of life became almost meditative. I realized that the city was no longer just a place I lived. It had become a living classroom, a source of endless lessons about patience, courage, connection, and self-awareness. Before returning to my apartment, I paused on a small bridge, reflecting on everything I had learned so far. Observation teaches patience. Reflection teaches understanding. Engagement teaches empathy. Mistakes teach resilience. Stories teach perspective. I wrote in my notebook, transformation is continuous. Each day, each person, each moment offers opportunities to grow. Understanding the world requires attention, effort, and empathy. Life is a long journey, and the city is both a mirror and a teacher. Tomorrow will bring new experiences, challenges, and opportunities to learn, but today has already taught me that growth comes from openness, courage, and mindful observation. I walked back to my apartment, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. The city, which had seemed overwhelming just days ago, now felt like a mentor, a companion, and a canvas on which I could paint my own understanding of life. I realized that transformation is not about dramatic events, but about small, consistent actions, reflections, and interactions. And with that thought, I ended the day, preparing for tomorrow's journey, knowing that the path of learning, growth, and self-discovery was endless, and that each day offered new chapters, new lessons, and new opportunities to understand both the city and myself more deeply.